Just to let you know, this episode deals with themes of grief and depression. Welcome to Filmability. My name is Joel Fisher and I'm the author of Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema, which you can find on Amazon in Kindle paperback. Welcome if this is your first time joining, and welcome back if you listened before. Remember, you can find me wherever you get your podcasts, so don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment and all that good stuff. This week's film is Marvellous, and I'm not just saying that myself, but it's the name of the film. A biopic of a man called Neil Baldwin, a man with a learning disability who used his personality to get in places, including Stoke City Football Club, where he became a household name in football. Marvellous was directed by Julian Farino, a director best known for a long career directing television episodes both in the US and the UK, from Coronation Street to Sex and the City. Since Marvellous, he has continued to direct TV, such as episodes of Ballers with Jane Johnson, and Girl Hadji, and more recently, episodes of Amadeus starring Will Sharp and Paul Bettany. The screenplay for Marvellous was written by Peter Boker, a writer who had been previously known for 2009's Wuthering Heights adaptation with Charlotte Riley and Tom Hardy, and Eric and Ernie, a biopic about British comedy double acts Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise. Since then, he's gone to write TV series The A Word and World on Fire. As usual, I recommend you watch Marvellous before continuing with the podcast, because I would be spoiling everything. You can find Marvellous on Amazon Prime for free in the UK, and it's available to rent or buy digitally everywhere else. So without further ado, let's get on with the film. So the film starts out with the real Neil Baldwin and Toby Jones, who plays him, and Neil says, "This is my story." There's a public gathering of people, many people are coming in next, and they have a ukulele orchestra, and they start playing and singing, and they're singing Delilah by Tom Jones. A card comes up on the screen saying, "Based on true story," and there are pictures of the real Neil Baldwin, pictures of him throughout his childhood and dramatised moments at school, including him going to school and eventually joining the circus. He's a clown in the next scene, and he's entertaining the crowd, and a quote comes up on the screen saying, "I met lots of people in real life, I'm glad I did." And that quote is from Neil Baldwin himself. So he's at the circus next, and somebody hands him a note, and he's waiting to go out to entertain the crowd. He's talking to the ringmaster, saying he's been paid less than usual, but the ringmaster doesn't care and just gets him to go out, and he entertains the crowd. Outside, Neil gets out of his camper van after the circus has gone, and he realises that he's been left behind. He goes to a church and he knocks on the door, and the vicar opens the door, and Neil says that he is a friend of the bishop and that he needs a lift to go to Stoke-on-Trent, which is a far way away from where they are. But the vicar says that he doesn't think he can, but Neil convinces him otherwise, and they go inside. And the next thing you know, you see Neil is eating breakfast in the vicar's home and talking about how he needs a tow bar to put on the vicar's car. The vicar isn't sure why they need a tow bar because of Neil's camper van. So the next scene, you see the first vicar and another vicar pushing a tow bar on the car, and the other vicar says that he wasn't lying when he says that he knows the bishop. And the other vicar asks how he knows him. He says he knows them because he's just being Neil. Neil then thanks the vicar and shows him an autograph book that he has of various members of the clergy. He has very, very big names in there, but he doesn't want the vicar to use that book, because there's a smaller book that he can use for less important clergy. He even has a Stoke City player in there, who Neil says is marvellous. In the car, the other vicar is driving Neil to where he needs to go, and they're talking about his mother. This vicar's name is called Rev Mark, and he's played by Nicholas Greaves. Rev Mark says that he's worried about Neil's mum because she isn't getting any younger, and Neil agrees, saying none of us are. At home, Mary comes out to see him as he comes out of the house. Her name is Mary, and she's played by Gemma Jones. Inside, Mary is drawing the birds as she sees in the garden, as Neil is making a tally of them on a chart. Mary says that she's worried about how Neil can just talk to anybody, and he says that not everybody is nice, but the people who are can be very helpful. Neil says that he has a job at university suddenly, and that he starts tomorrow. And then we next see Neil Baldwin sitting with Toby Jones, and he asks Neil if he was nervous, and Neil says that he was never nervous. We then see Neil greeting people as they come out of the university. He's dressed as a priest and is wearing a dog collar. One man comes and makes friends with him and asks if he works there. Neil says he thinks he does. He doesn't, but he thinks he does. Next, Neil's new friend is called Malcolm, and he's played by Greg McHugh. They're at a pub, having a pint, eating a meal, and Neil even signs up for a football team. Then a montage plays of him sitting in lectures, playing football, and even the student hall of residence, while he's watching football on TV and everybody else is doing student things like. The film then cuts to the ukulele orchestra who've been playing Enjoy Yourself by the Specials throughout this scene. At home, Mary asks what he does at university, but Neil is trying to change the subject by talking about the birds that he sees outside the window. Walking in the street, Neil and Mary are then talking some more, and they talk about their faith, and Mary thinks that he doesn't want a job because he's going to get bullied. And this is a point raised by the film, and Mary certainly has a point. She knows Neil is treated differently by others, and she worries about it as any other mother would. There are many factors that disabled people have to think about when finding employment. Accessibility may be a big factor for physically disabled people, and often the work environment could be something they would have to consider as well, especially if they were thinking about leaving to find employment elsewhere. Finding people who will accept you, treat you fairly, and give you a chance to prove yourself can be difficult, and even when you think you found a place, there can be little microaggressions that may hinder your career. There may be a well-meaning and ever so nice person who wishes to help the disabled employee, and often it can be difficult to tell that person no, even if they don't take no for an answer. Sooner or later, you may find that your work is being overtaken by that well-meaning but overly helpful employee, and that could lead to your employer thinking that you're not a useful part of the team. There's also the thought that a disabled employee could be overlooked for a promotion, something that can happen even if a disabled person does put themselves up for it. If an employee sees a disabled person in a certain way, then their chances of a more fulfilling position may be put out of their hands. And we get to bullying, something which can be more obvious in some cases, but unless you're Neil Baldwin, who enjoys playing the clown, you may find yourself as the butt of the joke or somebody that nobody ever takes seriously. At a job centre, the woman behind the desk asks what Neil wants to do, and he says he wants to be a football manager, and he says that he's a registered clown. And he produces a painted egg from his pocket, saying that all clowns are individual, and that if anybody were to steal his look, then they could be sued. Which is true. He says he would rather be Stoke City manager, but he draws the line at Port Vale. The woman behind the desk smiles, and she says that there are certain schemes that can help disabled people get into work because Neil has a learning disability. But Neil doesn't understand why she mentioned it, because he doesn't see himself as any different from everybody else. And this is the thing. There are schemes set up in the UK which are meant to help disabled people get into work by helping them with their CVs and interview skills. The trouble is that there isn't anything to teach employers about accepting disabled people into the workforce. Neil Baldwin got through life by never taking no for an answer, by being positive, and most of the time just turning up and getting on with things. Not all disabled people can do that though, And it can feel that a lot of the time that although there are well-meaning people who like to ensure that disabled people are happy, nobody's really finding ways to enable disabled people to be out on an equal footing in the job market. Everybody has an equal chance of getting a job if they put themselves out there, whether they're disabled or not. But turning up with an obvious disability can put a lot of potential employees at a disadvantage if they are judged before they even open their mouths. Neil and his mum are at a supermarket next, and she's worried that he won't be able to look after himself. He's taking sweets and putting them in the trolley, and his mum reminds him that fruit pastels are not fruit. And then he goes to the till, and on the way he picks up some cream eggs and puts them in the basket, to which the cashier takes them out, saying it's not worth it, and that those eggs aren't real eggs, although Neil says he thought the eggs were good for him. At home, Mary's taking her pills and feeling the pressure of having to do it. She then talks to Neil about having a place of his own, but he says he likes it there and that it's his home. At the church, Neil is talking to Rev Mark, and they're talking about his mum, but Neil says that she's busy. Rev Mark suggests Neil join the choir, but he says he's behind on his bird watching, the circus is in town, and he's writing another verse of the Lord's Prayer. The Rev wonders if he's joking, but he's pretty sure that Neil isn't joking. Next, Neil is moving in with Malcolm, though, and his mum thanks Malcolm for helping him. Neil is making a sign for the football team next, and he shows it to Malcolm, and then he turns on the radio and hears that Stoke are looking for a new manager after the last one was let go, and Neil thinks he might be in with a shot. At home, Mary opens the door to Rev Mark, and she says that she's worried about a letter and she thinks that it might be a bill that she can't pay. Rev Mark doesn't want to open it as it's not addressed to him, but he soon starts steaming it open with a kettle, and as Mary keeps worrying, she says that Neil has gone to London on parliamentary business. And this is the point that I think a lot of parents may relate to, whether they have a disabled child or not. Mary's getting on in age, and she's feeling it in many ways. She's taking pills, and finding simple things like climbing stairs very difficult, but partly due to stubbornness, and partly due to a refusal to submit to the next phase of her life is taking a toll on her. I'm sure that every parent at some point wants to carry on for as long as they can, and perhaps even further, because if they don't, then they don't know how their offspring will cope. However, the best that any parent can do is to teach their children how to be independent and to trust that everything will be okay and life will go on. And the next scene, Neil is by the roadside, hitching a lift while dressed as a clown. He gets to London, and there's a building with 2 police officers outside, and while he's there, he has decided that not dressing as a clown would be a better idea. But he goes up and asks if Tony Benn is there. Tony Benn was a Labour MP, and a very well-respected one as well. The policeman says that he can't say whether Tony Benn is there either way, and so Neil leaves the policeman a note saying that he's friends with his son, which again I would imagine was true. And the next scene, we see Neil sitting and talking with Tony Benn, who is shot from the back. You can see his grey hair and his signature pipe that he always smoked. And then we go to a coach. Toby Jones is with the real Neil, and he asks if he ever met Tony Benn, and Neil says that he did, and that he was very nice to him, and they both agree that Tony Benn was a very nice man. At home, Mary asks if he asked Tony Benn about the drains, and Neil just replies that he's a very busy man. She's worried about the things Neil is doing to waste money, and she still doesn't think he can manage. He says he's going for the Stoke City job, but his mum says that another manager has already been appointed, a man called Lou Macari, and Neil says that he'll see him instead tomorrow. And she asks if Lou is going to pay the electricity bill, and Neil asks why would he do that. And then Neil is seen praying in his bedroom. He's blessing all the people he likes, including Gordon Banks, who was a footballer, and Ken Dodd, who's a comedian, and he hopes that Stoke City does well in the next season. Outside the club, Lou Macari arrives and he's signing for fans, and Neil says that he'll be the new Archbishop soon, which surprises Lou a little bit, and he goes inside. Lou Macari is played by Tony Curran. Neil is waiting outside the club and it's getting dark, and Lou comes outside and wonders whether Neil has been waiting there all day. He talks about his time in the circus and how he got fired, and Lou says that he might have a place at the club for him, and Neil goes home. At Neil's place, Mary is sceptical that he has a job at the club, and he says he'll just be collecting and cleaning dirty kit. And then the next day Neil gets to the club, and several men who are security are sceptical as well that he works there, and he just asks to see the manager and say that Nello is there. Nello is the name of the clown that he plays. Then it cuts to the real Lou Macari and the real Neil Baldwin in the Stoke City Club building, and Lou says that Neil was just the right man for the job, and Neil thanks him. Neil then gets let in, and he makes fun of the security guard for doubting him by quoting a Bible verse. Outside, Neil is dressed as a chicken, loading the kits onto the coach. He's sort of the mascot as well as the kit man. And then inside, the team are being given a talk to by Lou, just telling them what to do in the match. And then Neil appears behind them, who's dressed as a chicken. He makes the entire team laugh. A montage then plays of Neil on the field, entertaining the crowd as they chant, "What the fuck is that?" at him. Then the team celebrate a win. On the coach, Neil and Lou are talking, and Neil says he talked a girl out of killing herself while dressed as Father Christmas once, saying that fancy dress is good for morale. And at home, Lou drives Neil home, and he asks what Neil said to the girl who wanted to kill herself, and he said, "Everybody has to go sometime, but why do you want to go now?" And he leaves. At the club, the team all pass Neil as he's loading the kits into the washing machines, and one of them calls him a slur against disabled people. And then we see the real Toby Jones with the real Neil, and he says it was a bit harsh. Neil says you have to get on, though. And Toby Jones asks if Neil was being picked on because of his difficulties. And Neil responds, "What difficulties?" Because Neil never sees himself as a disabled person. He's just who he is. And quite frankly, due to his personality, he gets through life by being who he is. And this is a point raised by the film, and Mary certainly has a point. She knows Neil is treated differently by others, and she worries about it as only other mother would. There are many factors that disabled people have to think about when finding employment. Accessibility may be a big factor for physically disabled people, and often the work environment could be something they would have to consider as well, especially if they were thinking about leaving to find employment elsewhere. Finding people who will accept you, treat you fairly, and give you a chance to prove yourself can be difficult, and even when you think you found a place, there can be little microaggressions that may hinder your career. There may be a well-meaning and ever so nice person who wishes to help the disabled employee, and often it can be difficult to tell that person no, even if they don't take no for an answer. Sooner or later, you may find that your work is being overtaken by that well-meaning but overly helpful employee, and that could lead to your employer thinking that you're not a useful part of the team. There's also the thought that a disabled employee could be overlooked for a promotion, something that can happen even if a disabled person does put themselves up for it. If an employee sees a disabled person in a certain way, then their chances of a more fulfilling position may be put out of their hands. And we get to bullying, something which could be more obvious in some cases, but unless you're Neil Baldwin, who enjoys playing the clown, you may find yourself as a butt of the joke or somebody that nobody ever takes seriously. At the club, Lou is reading a headline about how badly the team did, but Neil's on a ladder outside, and he puts his legs through the door, making Lou laugh. The team then go out onto the field, and we see Mary inside as she's struggling up some stairs. We then see real footage of Lou being interviewed in the field, while Neil is behind him in a sort of exaggerated Scottish traditional dress outfit, big kilt, big hat. And as he's being interviewed, Neil slowly lifts up his kilt, showing a rather hairy, prosthetic undercarriage, not a real one obviously, but an exaggerated one, and the interviewer cracks up. At a game, Lou and Neil then celebrate a win, and in Lou's office, Mary comes to visit, and she's talking to Lou, and he says that Neil's funny because he's Neil. It's who he is. So sometimes he's funny on purpose, but sometimes he's funny because of his misunderstanding of the world. The team are then outside, shouting and making jokes as Lou closes the door and apologises. She says she's worried because Neil isn't as quick as most people, and Lou reassures her that it's not a university challenge out there, and he says that Neil just makes everybody feel good. In the changing room, Neil's giving the team a talk while dressed in a tux and a large top hat. Lou thanks him, asking if Neil was impersonating him while he was talking to the team, but Neil says he was channeling Brian Clough instead. And the team all give Neil a high five as they go out onto the pitch. And after the game, after the win, they all lift up Neil and celebrate. At university, Neil says that Lou says that he should be giving the team talk every week, and he wants to see the boat race, which is between Cambridge and Oxford. It's a traditional race every year, and Malcolm suggests that he could just tape it on TV if he misses it. But Neil says he's going to go and see it live, and Malcolm asks how he managed to wangle that, and because he can't just ask people and they'll do it, and Neil says that he can. And considering the force of nature that is Neil Baldwin, I think we can fully agree that it's entirely possible. And then we see the real footage of Neil at the boat race, and Toby Jones asks the real Neil how they allowed him to do it, and Neil just replies that it's tradition. In the changing room, a player has a go at Neil, saying he's being too slow, and Neil says that he can sort his own kit out. They have a back and forth, and Lou says he's paying him too much if he can buy expensive underwear, because that's the thing that he's worried about the most, is getting the kit cleaned properly. The player then says he has the crown jewels and he should have the best underwear because he's keeping them safe. And asks Neil how much his underwear costs, and Neil says he doesn't know because his mum buys them for him. And the player then makes fun of him and it's flies of his dick, maybe. And Toby Jones and the real Neil are there, and Toby Jones says that the team weren't very nice to him. On the field while training, Lou asks Neil if he's put on any weight, and says his mum will kill him if he's put on weight. Inside the changing room, the team will come back, and the player who made fun of him before says that he can't find his underwear. And then Neil reveals that he has had the entire team's underwear on at the same time, and the player who made fun of him, his underwear is the one he put on first. And the entire team laugh because they can't believe what Neil has done. And then the team are all showering and they're singing Delilah, and the player that made fun of Neil's in the middle and he's getting hazed, and Neil gets ready to go home. And then he gets home and finds his mum has collapsed on the floor. At the hospital, a doctor is asking Mary questions as Neil is standing there and sort of trying to butt in, and sort of, that he's trying to get an idea that his mum's going to be okay, but he wants to make sure that he knows that he's perfectly capable. The doctor says that his mum won't be coming home tonight though, and the doctor then recognises Neil and asks him how the team are going to do this season. At his place, Neil is watching TV And then at the hospital, Neil is waiting in the hallway as a fan comes by and recognises Neil and asks him about the team. It's sort of nice. It's not like Neil is a mascot as such, because it seems that people see him as a person and they are very happy to talk to him, and he's a local celebrity, really. And the doctor comes along and tells Neil that his mum has had a heart attack, and Neil says that he'll pray for her and that he'll visit and she'll be home in no time. The doctor says it might not be that easy though, and Neil says he understands, but he says he's still going to come home. At the club, Lou suggests that Neil have some time off to look after his mum, but he says that his mum is coming home and he doesn't need the time off. Lou says that he doesn't know how Neil stays so positive all the time, and Neil just says he decides to be. Neil says that if bad things happen, then you have to think about the good things, like the best signing that Lou ever made, for example. At a nursing home, Neil comes to see his mum and brings her shopping, says he did it all from memory, and it's a load of food that she doesn't eat but Neil likes. Neil then says that he's been keeping his place clean, and he says he has a budgie, and he's going to name it after Lou. At a church, Reverend Mark is talking to the congregation, and he sees Neil come in. And in the back room, Reverend Mark is talking to Neil and says that he should take good care of himself, and asks Neil what he'd do if anything changed, like the club or his mum or something in the university. And he says he'd join the choir because that would fill up his time. And then I asked Reverend Mark if he feels better after their chat, because he knows that Rev is worried about him, but as far as Neil's concerned, he's fine. At home, Neil sees on TV that Lou has resigned, though, and this is the point where Neil starts to look worried. At the club, Neil is cleaning up some boots and puts a kiss in the washing machine. Lou comes in and says that he couldn't turn down the offer, and he says he's a little bit worried though about how Neil will do with the new management. He says he wants to put Neil on the bench, and Neil says he's always on the bench because he sits with him while they're watching the match. But Lou says that's not quite what he meant, and Lou presents Neil with a football shirt with his name on it and a number, and Neil says that he's going to try his best. It's like he's been finally given a chance to be on the team. Neil then comes to see his mum, and she says that she's glad that he's had a shave. He brings her the proper shopping this time, and he says he's been asked to come into the home as a clown to entertain people. Neil says he's playing for Stoke City that night, and his mum cries because she doesn't quite believe him. She thinks that he's not quite got a full grasp of what's going on, but she says that she's very proud of him. Neil then rushes to go to the club, and he's seen sitting with Lou in his football kit, and Lou says it's time for him to get up, and the crowd cheer for him. Lou then calls over a prayer and says that he wants to allow Neil to score a goal. And then he calls them all over and advises him what to do with the team and how he was going to score a goal for them. And then the real Lou Macari is sitting with Neil, and he says that this really happened. The players all stand on the field, and the ball comes towards Neil, and he heads it, getting it in the goal. And then the real Neil is sitting with Toby Jones, and he asks if that really happened like that, and Neil says no. In the club, Neil is loading kits into the washing machine, and he turns off the lights, leaving the room. He goes to see Lou, apologising for letting him down because he didn't do exactly as he was told in the match. Lou says it's okay though, and he tells Neil that he was the best signing decision he ever made. He packs up his cardboard box and he leaves. At the home, Neil arrives dressed as a clown, and he's asked to go into the office. He's told his mum has died peacefully in her sleep, and that she was really proud of him. He says he called earlier, but the woman said that they wanted to tell him in person. On the bus, Neil is looking sad, still dressed as a clown, and he goes into his own place and uses a flannel to clean his makeup off in the bathroom. He packs his things and sits down, and he starts to cry silently. It's a real moment. I mean, throughout this, Toby Jones has given such a great performance, but you can just see the levels in the character, and he treats Neil Baldwin as a person, as everybody else should. And after the service, at his mum's funeral, Neil talks about his mum saying that she let him run away to the circus and she was worried about his weight. He says they were a team like Stoke City and how she taught him good manners and always to be nice. And after the service, Neil thanks people for coming, and outside, Rev Mark asked how he's doing, and Neil says he's doing well, isn't he? Because everybody keeps saying, "You're doing well." He's going, "Yeah, I'm doing well." Malcolm then says that he's going to take Neil home, and when the vicar asks if he's going to get a lift, Neil then arrives at the home, and his mum's things are all laid out on the bed, and he sits down on the bed and looks out the window. And then at home we see Neil, and he's sitting by himself. And then at a shop, Neil is paying for something, and then he's shown singing in the choir, just as he said he would. Rev Mark then comes to see how Neil is doing, and he reiterates that he's doing well. But there's a sense that he isn't. Neil then goes home and finds a new budgie in a box waiting for him on the doorstep. He goes inside and puts it in the cage. And then at a match, Malcolm is there in the crowd, but there's a space where Neil would be, and he's not there. At home, Malcolm rings the doorbell, but Neil doesn't answer as he sits on the couch looking depressed. But Malcolm is then eventually let in, and is talking about the things that Neil has done, and encourages him to come down to the uni for Freshers Week so that he can get his football team going again. Neil's reluctant at first, but Malcolm convinces him. At the uni, Neil is sitting, waiting for people to come in to talk to him, but nobody comes along. And then later at night, Malcolm is driving along the road, and he sees Neil by the side of the road. And Neil says that he was waiting for a lift, but they must have forgotten. In the car, Malcolm says that he shouldn't be out at that kind of time of night by himself, and wonders what would have happened if nobody came. He says that Neil can't rely on somebody just to turn up, and he says that he can. At the uni, people are lining up for the team, and a student talks about what position he plays, and Neil says he can't play that position because that's the position he plays. The student thinks he's joking though, but he then does sign up. At a football pitch, Neil is talking to the team, and they're making fun of him until a man called Uriah Rennie turns up, who is a professional football association referee, and the team are all very impressed because they know who he is. And on the pitch, the team are playing, and the ref calls for a penalty, which Neil takes, but the goalkeeper catches it, and the ref says that he's in the wrong place for the goal, and when the goalkeeper argues, he gives him a yellow card. Neil then lines up to go for another goal, and he gets it in, imagining himself as a pro player, and the team celebrate. At the church, Neil is listening to Rev Mark, and after the service, he's sitting with him, and he says that he always knew he'd become a bishop, because that is what he is now. He gives him a card to say congratulations, and he says he has a cockatoo. But the bishop says that he can't accept any more gifts. But Neil says that it's his cockatoo. He says the cockatoo is poorly, but he'll nurse it back to health. And the bishop says that Mary always thought he was good with animals. It's started to show that Neil is healing and he's getting on with his life. Neil then negotiates a ride home with the bishop, and he's sitting at home watching TV as the crowd in the football ground start singing there's only one Neil Baldwin. And then a card comes up saying that Nello the Clown is still a legend in the circus community. Then cuts to the real Neil Baldwin with a ringmaster. And again cuts to him with his team. And another card comes up saying that Neil Baldwin is still the manager of the Neil Baldwin Football Club, and he's been Player of the Year for the past 42 seasons. Then we see the real Neil with the real Malcolm, and another card comes up saying that they've been friends for over 50 years. And the real Lou Macari is seen with Neil Baldwin, and another card comes up saying that Lou Macari still makes a living from football as a pundit. He still lives near Stoke-on-Trent. Neil is then shown with a group of students, and another card comes up saying Neil has been talking to students at Keele University for 53 years and counting. Then Neil is shown receiving an award at a university, and the card says that in June 2013, Neil received an honorary master's degree from Keele University for services to student welfare. Finally, Neil is at a match and the crowd chants for him, and he kicks a ball at the goal simply by moving his foot to kick it, and the goalkeeper dramatically leaps over the ball and misses as the ball goes into the goal. Neil then pops his fist in the air, turning to the camera to celebrate his goal. Okay, so that was the film. And up next, I'm going to give you a roundup of my thoughts and what I think it would mean for a non-disabled audience. Marvellous is a film that lives up to its name. When compared to other biopics of relatively well-known disabled people, Marvellous is head and shoulders above the rest. Neil Baldwin is portrayed as a man who has a learning disability, but as it should be shown to the rest of the world, that's just a small part of who he is. Marvellous treats Neil Baldwin as a person first and his disability second, highlighting his personality and ability to win people over with his humour, positivity, and perhaps a little of his faith. Including people whom Neil Baldwin has met, and the man himself sheds light on the impact that he really had on the people around him. It also shows how real disabled people are shunned in cinema, especially when a film is about them, played by a non-disabled person trying to show their range. However, Toby Jones's portrayal is not for the applause or the plaudits, as he shows the audience who Neil really is, whether he is entertaining a crowd or sitting by the real person. Jones brings warmth, light, and a kind of friendliness that would bring a smile to the coldest of hearts. Thankfully, Neil Baldwin isn't portrayed as a man who made people feel better because they wish they weren't him, as is the case in many films about disabled people. Instead, Marvellous makes us wish that there was a little bit of Neil in all of us, and reminds us of the good people in the world. Okay, so up next I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk a bit more about Neil Baldwin's life and the people he met, but I'm also going to mix in a bit of the trivia about the film. Born to Harry and Mary Baldwin on 15th of March 1946, Neil Baldwin was diagnosed with a learning disability as a child and required speech therapy. Baldwin left school at 16 to join Sir Robert Fawcett's circus, the oldest circus in England, for whom he performed as Nello the Clown for 3 seasons. Neil Baldwin's love of football also garnered him a lot of famous friends, including Gary Lineker, who was the president of Neil Baldwin's football club for a time, as was Kevin Keegan. Among the other football icons that became Neil's friends were Sir Alec Baldwin, Gordon Banks, and Graham Taylor. Among the royal family, Neil knows Prince Edward after he knocked on his university door unannounced and was invited in to drink sherry. Queen Elizabeth II also gave Neil a British Empire medal and invited him back to the Buckingham Palace garden party, and he has met Princess Catherine, Princess of Wales, at many high-profile events. Among the clergy, Neil Baldwin has known 2 Archbishops of Canterbury, Rowan Williams and Justin Welby, and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. As mentioned in the film, Neil says a prayer for Ken Dodd, not only a comedian who he admired, but somebody he knew as they met during their connections to entertainment. He also became friends with Susan Boyle, who he sent handmade cards to, and they struck up a friendship. This even led to them doing a show together on BBC Radio Stoke called Susan Boyle in Conversation, where they talked about their lives, their love of music, and their mutual admiration. In the film, Neil's goal didn't go quite as well as planned as it in real life. It was Gordon Cohen's testimonial at Villa Park, and Neil actually missed his goal in real life, although everything looks better in the movies. Stoke City's Victoria Ground has long been demolished before filming began on Marvellous, so filming took place at Crewe Alexandra's Crusty Road and Wrexham's Racecourse Ground to stand in for Stoke's former home. The player involved with the underwear incident was Martin Carruthers, and the incident happened during an away game at Tranmere Rovers. And finally, Neil wore the chicken suit at an away game at Cambridge United. It was such a hot day that supporters were passing out and water bottles were handed out to help to combat the heat. However, Neil wore the chicken suit the entire time while he was sat in the dugout. Okay, that's it for this week. Next week I'll be watching Blind Justice, a film about a blind gunslinger in the Old West. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so via Bluesky at bluesky.com/film-ability. You can also email me at film-ability@outlook.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the things that I do here, you can find me at Patreon at patreon.com/film-ability. You can also find my book at Amazon on Kindle and paperback called Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.